Welcome to the Connected College podcast. I'm your host, Elliot Felix. I've helped more than 100 colleges and universities change what they offer, how they operate, and how they're organized to enable student success. And if you're a leader in higher ed and you think that the silos and separations get in the way of student success, then this podcast and my upcoming book, The Connected College, are for you. We're here to learn and work together to bust silos, question tradition, and forge partnerships so that students feel connected to their college, their community, their coursework, and their careers. Maggie Tomas never set foot in her undergrad career center, but now she runs one. She leads career development at University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management. And her purpose is to help students find theirs so they can find career success in a more direct way than she did back then. We have a great conversation about career development and how it's being integrated into academics, how interactions with employers are becoming more engaging, no more boring info sessions and career fairs, and how institutions and employers alike are working to make the recruiting process more equitable.
Exploring, planning for, and supporting the career development process is such a critical part of student success that I'm really excited to have Maggie Tomas from the Carlson School at University of Minnesota here today to talk through this. Welcome, Maggie.
Happy to be here.
Tell us a little bit about yourself, how you got started in higher ed, how you found your way into career development.
My current role is I manage the Carlson Business Career Center. So lead a team of 17 working on employment for Carlson business students. I've been in career services for over 20 years. I found it kind of strangely. So I'm born and raised in Los Angeles, not in Minnesota. I am not a cold weather native, but I've been here for a while now. So I grew up in Los Angeles, and my first consistent paid job was opening and sorting Clint Eastwood's fan mail on the Warner Brothers studio lot.
I was going to guess that. Yeah.
I grew up in Burbank, California, and one of the things that's the big industry in Burbank is the studios. So I was 17 years old, my senior year, opening and sorting fan mail. It was exciting for about an entire week. I was excited to maybe catch a glimpse of the ER or the Friends set. This is in the mid to late 90s. That excitement wore off pretty quickly. And something in me knew pretty instinctively that I needed something with more meaning, more impact. The work I was doing had no bearing on the movie being made. I was his assistant. I proceeded to finish out that job through the summer after my senior year and went on to undergrad. I quickly declared a major with really little research, and it was elementary education. I was going to be a kindergarten teacher. And I went full force into the elementary education major. When you're an education major, you have lots of opportunity in the classroom to see if this is something that is meant for you. I did. And time again, it showed that it didn't necessarily play to my skill set, but I plowed through. I got my teaching credential in California, and I taught kindergarten for 2 years. I was miserable. Kindergarten teachers are amazing. I have had kindergartners myself, of children of my own, but kindergartners have 15-minute attention spans. So you plan lesson plans for 15 minutes and you are extremely detail-oriented. And that is not what I was. I was miserable, kind of akin to when I was opening and sorting Clint Eastwood's fan mail. I had low energy. It was Friday night and I'm in my early to mid 20s and I don't want to go out with my friends. I didn't find it rewarding. That experience awakened something in me to try to search for something that did make me feel healthy and vibrant and alive. I did a couple of informational interviews. I talked to some friends that were in psychology programs, and I ended up finding a psychology program that had an emphasis in career counseling to help people be career counselors in college. And that is what I've been doing ever since. I have worked in a variety of different higher ed spaces. I worked in the University of California system. I've worked at art and design schools. I've worked at private Catholic higher ed institutions. And I've been at a Big 10 here for almost 12 years. I've done the career counseling coaching side of career development. I've done the working with employer side of career development in a career center, but I usually end up navigating my way to a little bit more of a broad leadership role because I have found that I love the impact of impacting the team that I work with and the broad scope of students. I like seeing trends and I like creating partnerships within higher ed. Ultimately, I love that I am hopefully leading a team that helps students find out what they want to do so they don't end up in a career that makes them a little bit miserable.
So maybe help them meander slightly less than you did, get to A to B in a more fulfilling, meaningful way.
I'm a person that runs a career center that an undergrad never stepped foot in the career center. So my goal is that does not happen to most students.
Yeah, well, I think that certainly gives you an interesting perspective. I remember when I was in grad school at MIT, there was this research group at the Media Lab trying to reinvent the car. My pitch to them was I should be part of this group because I hate cars. I sold my car when I was 18.
Right.
I haven't had
Right.
one since. And, don't just populate this team with fans, you should populate it with skeptics or people who haven't had that experience. I can relate. To kind of build a little bit of a foundation here, there's so many different terms that are thrown around, and they all tend to be two words, the first of which is career. There's like career services, there's career development, there's career exploration, there's career
Mhm.
placement.
Mm.
Can you make sense of that for us? Do those all mean the same thing, or are they different parts of the career enterprise?
I think it's different part of the career experience for students. There are definitely people that will take issue to the word placement. That's definitely something that causes a reaction in career center folks. Career development is really helping students figure out how and what they want to do. There's career development, career design, career services is the ways, how do you tap into what the school offers? So that might be tapping into assessments. It might be tapping into workshops, information sessions where employers are here, interviews that are taking place on campus, right? It might be tapping into the technology that we have that supplements your career search. So that's sort of the career services piece. The career placement or career employment is really how does the school help connect you to opportunities and track where the students landed. And that is a piece that is important in the career services world. And it's tracked more stringently in some, depending on like the type of school. But that sort of tracking of where the students end up, that first destination, career centers use it to help admissions folks tell the story. When you're shopping around for a school, what would be that end result? Where would you land? What does that look like? But also the career services folks use it to work with employers to show them where our students land. You might want to hire more of our students because they tend to like these types of jobs. We use that information to help prospective students, current students, and employers.
It sounds like there's almost like kind of a tree or a fork where it starts with the career design and development, like
Yep.
what you want to do based on who you are, strengths, interests,
Mm-hmm.
network skills. And then you support it from two sides
Yep.
internally with assessments and info sessions and workshops and interviews and technology, Handshake, LinkedIn, whatever it might be. And then
Yep.
externally with these relationships with employers where you're making these
Yeah.
connections.
Yeah. We talk about the career services process or our process when students come in is how do you sort of start with reflecting and ideating. Who am I? What are my interests? Like really tapping in, like understanding self, understanding what's out there. The next step is sort of engaging. How do we help you sort of engage outward? That might be some of the events that we have on campus. That might be with alumni. And then the next thing is how do we help you execute? How do we actually help you get the skills to land the job and bring those jobs and experiences to you? That's the model that we've worked with for several years. We're also adding a piece we're calling grounding, that exploration and design process. We want it to happen throughout, and we want students to constantly ground and do that gut check of like, how does this feel? As I'm engaging, how does this feel? Maybe this doesn't feel good. I got to go back to ideation and try something else. So if I had done more grounding every time I was practicing in a classroom and realizing I don't like this, right? Like I might have went back to that ideation piece and explored that while I was in. And we hope that these skills and this process, by giving them this framework while they're students, they can then take it with them throughout their career. This first destination job is just a first destination. How do they have those skills for the next time something doesn't feel right at work? Oh, let me reflect and ideate, continue to be ground and start to network and then apply for jobs.
I like that. The active verbs that kind of tell you where to focus, reflect, ideate, engage, execute, explore. How do you define student success?
For me, student success is about ensuring that students know how to access the resources that support them in learning, growing, and ultimately graduating with a degree that will provide them options to postgraduate opportunities. So what I look at in terms of student success is engagement, graduation, and employment. Ultimately, I want students to know how to access all these things to ensure that they are continuing to learn, grow, graduate, and find opportunities for post graduation.
And does one lead to the other? An engaged student
Yeah.
is then more
Yep.
likely to graduate, is then more likely to be
Yeah.
employed.
This is a really interesting time to talk to higher ed leaders because we're all coming out or living with the pandemic in what this new world is with students. And what engagement looked like in 2019, pre-COVID, was really different than what engagement looked like in 20 and 21. And then when we came back, when most schools came back fully in person in 21 and 22, engagement was, if I talk to most of my counterparts, at least in the career and student life areas, is engagement was really down with students. And we didn't know if this is the new normal. So how do we deal with this? How are we going to get them to get involved? Is this how they engage now? This year, we've been pretty intentional about creating more buzz, more marketing surrounding some of what we do, more engagement opportunities to increase that engagement, because we actually do think that's going to help with all those other metrics. And we're fairly early on in it, but we're seeing if we put more energy and more intention into it, the engagement's looking more like it was in 2019. And that could partly be because we're putting a lot more effort into being buzzy and marketing with our engagement tactics, but it also could be that everyone's getting more comfortable with engaging in person too.
Right. It's a little chicken or egg,
Exactly.
but
Exactly.
if I'm understanding you correctly, you're saying coming out of the pandemic, students were just like less involved. They weren't
Yes.
participating in career development activities. They like weren't going to the info session, or weren't doing the interviews, or they weren't taking the workshop or doing the assessment.
No, they weren't last year. The engagement was really low. And it was across the board when I was talking to colleagues at other universities. What was interesting too is the employment rate for 2022 grads was skyrocketing, like nothing we'd ever seen.
Because
But
of the
that's also
job
because
market.
we were in this job market. But then when we were seeing what was happening with the interns who had not engaged, internship numbers were going down. We had to almost train those. You got to keep engaging because you can't fall back on this amazing job market. The job market is now becoming a little more stringent. It's not as bad as everyone says.
And what role does career development play if student success is knowing about and accessing resources to learn, grow, and graduate, provide you opportunities? I'm wondering like what you see as the role of career
Yeah.
development in
Yeah.
student success.
I want our office, and I think ultimately is how do we help students, one, tap into who they are and what their interests are innately? How do we help them connect that to what they're learning in the classroom? And then how do we help them connect that to what is out there as options and possibilities outside of the classroom? Right. So I want them to understand who they are and how they tick and what their interests and skills are. I want them to take that self-knowledge and like constantly questioning what appeals to them in the classroom. And then I want them to utilize our services to see what is out there beyond the classroom, whether it's an internship or a job that matches those interests that you have. And hopefully through that whole process, not only are they finding a job or an internship that matches their interests, but also that grows their confidence in understanding self, understanding what's out there, and then being able to, again, go through that whole job search cycle as an alum. And we also have to marry all that intrinsic self-awareness and classroom self-awareness with helping them figure out what their values are and priorities in terms of non sequiturs for a job search. For some people, it's location. For some, they need a certain pay range. For other people, it's impact or industry. So also helping them marry interest versus that value piece.
That makes a ton of sense. One of the key values from career development is making these connections, connecting who you are and what you care about, what you're good
Yeah.
at, with what you're learning and how that might play out into a career. I'm kind of a lover of alliteration. So as you were saying that, I was thinking about like, okay, it starts with the person, and then you're trying to connect a person who, because they're engaging, they understand themselves better, they can get in the right program, degree program, certificate, whatever it might be. And then that gives them a path. So that path gives them a sense of purpose
A purpose.
because I'm
Exactly.
going to take what I've learned in
Yeah.
my stats class, use it in my internship
Mhm.
or whatever it might be.
Yeah. And our hope is that most career centers have two sides. There's the student facing side, so the career coaches or career counselors or career advisors, whatever your career center calls them. And the other side is the employer facing side, bringing employers to engage with students. Hopefully, along that whole process that you just described, really with your alliteration, is we are able to help them with tips on how do you dig into who you are as a person? How do we help you identify programs that might match that? How do we help you with a path from both putting paths in front of you to helping you research paths? And how do we ultimately help you constantly do that gut check? Does this align with my purpose?
I think that's really interesting. It's like them reframing it and saying it's more than a job, it's a purpose. Like what you get out of engaging with career services, career development is this sense of who you are and who you want to be. It makes your experiences in class or out of it more meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that's how you find a sense of belonging or a sense of identity or
Mm-hmm.
any of these other things.
Absolutely.
What do you think is changing about how this all works, about how students design, develop, explore, engage,
Yeah.
execute? I mean, you mentioned changes in engagement, but what are the big things that are like reshaping how career services works?
A couple of big changes is I think we're seeing more and more schools have career in the curriculum, either a dedicated career class, like you go through this class, you take it and you learn some of these different tools that we were just talking about. You learn how to do self-exploration, you learn how to do research and how to identify a program that matches. You learn how to have the tactical skills to connect and engage. It's embedded in throughout the curriculum in different courses, right? So we're seeing it less as this like add-on and more embedded in curriculum. And that's been a trend for years, but I'm seeing it almost across the board
Everywhere.
now.
Yeah.
Another big change is how employers engage with students. And that comes from COVID partly. So, employers got really used to, they had to, no one was traveling, no one was going on campus, everything was virtual. So they got really used to virtual engagement. And so, how a lot of schools would measure success on that employer piece was how many companies do we have coming to the career fair? How many companies do we have coming to an information session? How many companies are coming and interviewing? Well, the way employers are gauging is a little bit different now. Not all of it is as in person. And we're sort of in this middle ground of what virtual engagement should look like. Monitoring ourselves and our success is a moving target right now because it's changing. And the way that employers are engaging with students are demanding that it look different. Pre-COVID, a standard way that a company would engage to sort of showcase who they are to a student would be they do an info session. They would come on campus and they'd talk about, here's who we are as a company. Here are some slides that showcase, what our service or product is. Here's the roles we hire for. Here's how you engage with us. Students do not want to sit and be talked at. The patience for sitting through something to show that you were sitting through something where you could find it online, students don't have it. So they either want quick engagement where it's like tabling, let me meet you, or at the career fair, or they want employers to actually teach them something. We're seeing more and more employers get involved in that education piece where they don't come and they do an info session. They're instead going to teach you how to best use Excel or how to solve a case or how would you look at selling this new product. And so they're coming in and teaching a bit of that. We're having conversations with employers that are much more co-creating experiences with students and they're more meaningful and there's less quantity of engagements with employers and a little bit of deeper engagement. And that's based on the students demanding that. You wanted a couple of trends. I had one more that is the importance of inclusion and equity in recruiting. And so I think for years, I've been in career services for 20 years, and there was always this feeling that we should feel so fortunate when a company wants to come and recruit our students. What the company wants, they will get. We are grateful that they are here and they're going to give a job to our students. And we're now more looking at what is our responsibility to ensure that that recruiting process is equitable and inclusive. And so how are we training employers on what is inclusive in recruiting? So more training time with employers. If you're going to come on campus, here is what your process needs to look like. Here's how you remove bias from your interviewing. Here's what your job description should look like. Here's what language should and should not be in there. What we want is to ensure that our students can bring authenticity into that job search. We're starting to track pay transparency. How many of our employers are posting salary ranges? And we're trying to track that and monitor that and showcase to employers X% show a salary range. Where are you in that? So I think that our acknowledgement of our responsibility in ensuring that the whole process is inclusive, I'm seeing that as a trend, not just here at Carlson, but with my colleagues at other schools too.
Why does it fall to the college to fill
Hmm.
that gap, do you think?
I think we have an opportunity. We're putting students in a pretty vulnerable position. For a lot of them, this is their very first job search. We're in this interesting space where we are connecting them to employers and holding interviews on campus or holding networking events on campus. And so, what is our responsibility to ensure that that employer is as inclusive as possible? And two, employers are constantly asking us for diverse talent. And my response back is, how inclusive is your process? How inclusive is your evaluation process? How are you looking holistically at ensuring that this process is equitable?
So it's like thinking of this as like, gosh, we have to pick up the slack for these employers that have outdated policies and processes. You're looking at it more as like, no, actually, we have an opportunity to like improve the
Yeah.
process
Yeah.
and help our students. There's a power imbalance and they're like particularly vulnerable
Yeah.
at this moment.
How do we learn together with employers? Like, how do we learn from our students? Like, when we started on this journey, we did focus groups with 6 different underrepresented student groups to say, like, what was this process for you? What felt inclusive? What didn't? Because we're learning too, because we've been in this business for a long time, following standard recruiting processes in career services. So, learning with employers and learning with students. And like I said, I think that many schools are in the same boat as we're learning through this. And it's exciting because I do feel like we're in a space where we could potentially impact change.
What are some examples of people who are adapting to these changes and seizing the opportunity either at Carlson or across the country or across the industry where people are
Yeah.
really using career development and support services to enable student success?
I'll give a couple of examples. One that came from another school that we adapted in our own. So I went to a conference several months ago. This is on that DEI example, like what is our responsibility with inclusion? And I heard from the Career Center at University of Miami in Ohio. And they have a whole DEI career services team. There's like 3 or 4 people that just focus on DEI within the Career Center. It was a centralized career center. They created a DEI mastermind for their employers. It was a 6-part series on DEI, diversity, inclusion, and equity, like, removing bias, equitable recruiting, different focuses on each of those 6 workshops. And if employers went through that, they could participate in a reverse career fair where they were walking up to student clubs and almost trying to interview and engage with them. Because a lot of times employers are asking, how do we get access to your diversity and affinity clubs? This was their way of sort of reversing it on them and also creating this cohort of employers committed and educated on this DEI initiative within the Career Center. I loved it. And I thought, how could we model something similar at Carlson? So we have our Carlson Inclusive Employer program where it's a 3-part series. We're inviting our employers to participate. One is on inclusion in the job search. The second part is inclusion in the onboarding experience. And then the third part is inclusion intergenerationally, facilitated by a DEI expert that we worked with and include Carlson's student experiences. Student club leaders are sharing their experiences. Once that's completed, employers will receive a certification, an inclusive employer certification. So that showcases students the commitment that this employer has taken in this space. Because one of the things that we have repeatedly heard from our students is, how do we know what an employer's commitment is to DEI? And so this is sort of a way around that. That's an interesting thing that we sort of took from another school and adapted.
Do people use the JUST label? Is that becoming a metric that students are looking at before they'll take an interview or?
No, not yet, but I do see they're trying to look for, how can I find labels like that?
Mhm.
So I don't know that that's uniformly what they're using. There have been some students that are familiar with it and talk about it, and we showcase the student. These are some of the things you can look for. One student has shared in a recent panel that, I don't want to have to ask about your commitment to DEI. I want to see that throughout the process, right? Like, that needs to be apparent in order for me. Like, that's what I'm looking for in a culture. These are sort of things that we're trying to train our employers in.
Show, not tell.
Seems like I don't want to have to get to that question and
Yeah.
ask it. Like, I want to have seen that before.
Yeah.
And I think that bleeds into another trend that I don't think we're in the place, even if the job market is tightening, where students are feeling like they need to be so grateful for a job.
Yeah.
Like, they're sort of like, I'm interviewing you too. Is this going to be safe for me? And I think that that is something maybe from the pandemic, as people realize, what space, what place should work be? How big of a role should it be for me? And then I think another example I wanted to share is about employers teaching and training. So what we're starting to do now is work and partner with faculty on, could they incorporate some of their assignments? Could they be opting in for a student to participate in one of these employer training and education pieces? An example is consulting firms doing a case competition. Could that be an assignment? Could that take place of an assignment in a class, in a problem-solving class? Right? Because that is going to do twofold. One, it's going to get students to see the application of what that faculty member is trying to teach. It makes it real world. If they're like, the faculty's teaching me here, I can utilize in this case competition that's being hosted by X consulting firm. And then two, it's getting more students engaged and aware of what this might be, and it makes the employer happy, right? Like, so that's a really good way. We're trying to like connect more to these particular functions in the classroom to sort of bridge that gap so students can see how they will utilize these skills.
That's a really great example of both of them, the employer partnerships and teaching and inclusive hiring. In our last 5 minutes or so, I'm wondering what advice you have for people that work in career development, career services to enable student success. What would you tell them to increase their hit rate, their success rate?
We're doing so much in higher ed and career services. We have so many different stakeholders. We have students, we have alumni, we have employers. And I'm always trying to tell my team, if you just focus on the student first and foremost, that is your directive. Our priority is to the student, not to the employer, not to the alumni, it's always to the student. And if we focus on that, we will be able to determine what best next steps we should take with all of those stakeholders. I think being flexible and creative is really important. We're in this space of dynamic change in career services. Higher ed can be this space where not being afraid to try new things is important. One, it re-energizes you in career services. We're on a, academic calendar. So sometimes it can feel like Groundhog Day. So if we're constantly refreshing and trying new things, it energizes us to be better for those students. And as you're being flexible and creative, really ensuring that you have partnerships and allies throughout the college, partners and allies in the advancement team, in the academic team, getting to know the faculty, ensuring that you're working closely with alumni relations, right? Like, how are you having these allies where you can partner and do things together? I think some of the best new things we're doing are bridging multiple services, so it feels more holistic for the student. The final thing that I think that I would recommend any career services leader is to be really intentional and targeted in your employer outreach. Give yourself goals on how many employers you want to be engaging with and how many employer opportunities that you're bringing on campus, and monitor it and track it. If we stay in a reactive state of letting employers come to us, we're not tapping into all the potential that's out there for the students. Being intentional and reaching out to new employers and bringing them on campus will keep us relevant for the students, and they will continue to trust us and utilize our services. Whenever I see students stopping engaging with career centers, it's often because they're not seeing the value and they're not seeing any new initiatives or new employers coming from the career center. So if we're continuing to bring new things to them, they will continue to come to us.
I love that. That's really good advice. You also covered earlier, like, inclusive hiring, embedding with academics and coursework, finding new ways to engage both employers and students. So it's not an info session, it's a hands-on learning, experiential learning opportunity. It's really good stuff.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your advice and insights. This is such an important part of how students succeed. And so thank you so much.
Thank you, Elliot. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Connected College podcast. Subscribe to my Connected College newsletter at elliottfelix.com for insights and excerpts from my upcoming book, tools you can download, and special offers. You can also find more information about talks I've given, articles I've written, and upcoming events there. And please support the podcast by rating and reviewing it wherever you're listening. Let's create connected colleges where students will succeed.